Princess Aviran had been called Radiance, Air, Divine Vessel, and Living Seal. But no one had called her tired until the human did. She stood on the observation deck above the refugee planet of Aura. While ministers argued behind her about evacuation quotas, military optics, and mercy angles, Captain Jonah Vale, Earth liaison, an officially irrelevant advisor, looked at her reflection in the glass and said, "You look tired, Princess." Every alien in the room froze. Avreen expected apology, correction, perhaps panic. Instead, Jonah handed her a cup of bitter earth tea and added, "You do not have to drink it. It is terrible. But holding something warm helps people pretend they are not falling apart." Avern wrapped both hands around the cup, because for one dangerous second, she wanted to be someone with hands. Not a symbol with fingers, Jonah did not bow deeply enough. Did not flatter her courage, he asked whether she had eaten. That was the first treasonous kindness. Aura was dying beneath storms, and 3 million civilians needed transport before the atmosphere became poison. Evron's empire had ships, but not enough allies. But not honest ones' laws. But too many, every faction wanted a different compromise. Save the capital first. Save the scientists. Save the noble families who funded the fleet. Save the children only if cameras were present. They spoke around her as if her body were a throne placed in a conference room. Jonah spoke to her as if choices hurt when the evacuation plan arrived. It was beautiful, efficient, and monstrous. It prioritized citizens by imperial value index. The ministers praised its elegance. Avrin felt her throat close. Jonah read the first page, turned to the second, then asked, "Where are the grandmothers?" The chief minister blinked. Jonah continued, "Where are the people who cannot repay you? Where are the sick? Where are the children without documents? Where are the families who lost names when the storm took their town hall?" The room filled with offended silence. Then he looked at Avrin, not her crown, and said, "What do you want to be true when you remember this?" No one had asked her that. They asked what she authorized. Accepted, risked, represented, never what she wanted to carry in memory when the titles finally went quiet. Avrin dismissed the council for 10 minutes. Jonah stayed because she told him to. She asked whether Earth had faced evacuations like this. He said yes to many, some heroic, some shameful. She asked how humans chose when there were not enough ships. Jonah looked out at Aura's storms and said, "We try not to let math become a mask for cowardice." Avreen trusted him then, not because he was kind, but because he was willing to be uncomfortable beside the truth. They rewrote the plan in the storage annex, away from banners and advisors. Jonah spread population maps across ration crates. Avreen removed her crown because it kept catching on hanging cables, and together they built an evacuation sequence around vulnerability. Distance and survival odds, not prestige, they commandeered cruisers, cargo haulers, garden ships, and noble yachts. The ministers returned horrified. Accusing Jonah of manipulating the princess, Aviran answered before he could. She said manipulation usually made her choices easier. The human had made them harder and more honest. The backlash came faster than the storms. Noble houses refused ship access. One admiral delayed launch codes until his own relatives were moved forward in the queue. Jonah stepped close enough to speak softly. He said, "You can be loved by the people who profit from delay, or trusted by the people waiting in the rain, not both." She hated him briefly for making it simple, then loved the truth without naming the feeling. She walked to the command channel and stripped the admiral of authority. That was when the Empire discovered its symbol had become a person making decisions. The noble revolt turned violent at Dock 7, where private guards blocked refugee families from boarding a seized pleasure liner. Aviran went there herself, against every protocol, Jonah beside her with a plain sidearm. The guards refused royal order, claiming emergency inheritance law. Avreen felt the old training rise. Negotiate, preserve dignity. Avoid images of conflict, Jonah murmured. They are counting on you needing to look graceful. She stepped forward into the rain and ordered the dock workers to open the civilian gates manually. When a guard raised his weapon, Jonah disabled it, then said, "Anyone else want to explain property law to a hurricane?" The refugees surged aboard, with the stunned discipline of people who had been waiting for someone powerful to finally choose them. Avrin carried a child with a breathing mask up the ramp. Cameras caught everything, not the polished mercy her ministers wanted, but the messy kind, the kind with mud, shouting, and a princess who looked mortal enough to trust. Jonas stayed near, but never in front of her, because he understood the difference between protecting someone and stealing the meaning of their courage. By the final hour, the evacuation fleet rose through green-black clouds. Overloaded, ugly, miraculous Aura's atmosphere began to burn behind them, and Avrin stood on the command deck without her crown. Listening to survivor counts, she had lost nobles, ministers, and half the court's obedience. She had gained something stranger: the sound of millions breathing because they had not been converted into numbers. Jonah handed her another cup of terrible tea. She asked whether he always spoke to royalty so improperly. He said only when royalty looked hungry. Tired or surrounded by cowards, Avrin laughed, and the bridge crew looked away politely. Weeks later, the assembly tried to censure her for unlawful fleet seizure and allowing a human officer undue influence over imperial policy. Avrin listened until the charges became boring, then called Jonah as witness. They asked why the princess had trusted one human over noble counsel. Avrin looked at Jonah, who stood uncomfortable under attention. Then at the nobles, who still thought reverence was loyalty, she answered clearly, "Because he was the only one in the room who spoke to me as if I would have to live with myself afterward." The vote failed. The evacuation became legend, and Avrin kept the Earth Cup on her council table. Whenever ministers began speaking to the crown instead of the woman beneath it, she touched the cup and remembered rain, refugees, and a human voice saying the simplest forbidden thing: "You look tired."